Oh, wow. Imagine regenerative farming. I love it. Because think, you don't like freeze a seed indefinitely. It only does, and Jesus actually said this, it's only going to do any good if it dies and rolls over into the next incarnation. Right. Yeah, and actually, in terms of American farming, which I'm a little bit close to on one edge because we have for our little community, we have a very productive organic gardener, and the guy who lives in our community happens to be on the Organic Farm Board Bureau for Marin County. It's interesting that farmers are partly on board with organic farming because partly they have a sense that this would work very well, but partly they're suffering because they are marginal. Most farming, except for agribusiness, is marginal, and you cannot afford to do something that's going to take away your tiny little margin. So to convert to organic farming involves economic risks in the short term. But I would say if you took like a group of farmers and a group of non-farmers, on the whole, farmers would be more aware of and in favor of regenerative farming and sustainability and organic growth. Yeah, I know a friend of mine lived in a community somewhere in the Midwest, and there was a time when the government was giving out various kinds of ridiculous subsidies, and so they sent this community many, many blocks of Velveeta cheese in plastic wrappers. And so there are these, vegan animal rights people looking at this saran-wrapped food and said, what are we going to do with this? So they took their tractor out and dug a deep hole and buried all of this stuff. And it was a sustainable community, and some 10 or 12 years later they were plowing and they dug into this stuff, and guess what? It had not changed a hair. It looked exactly the way it did when they buried it in the ground 12 years earlier. So that's probably would do in your GI tract too. It would not go through any kind of regeneration process. All right. Yes, Ashley. Yeah. Oh. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 It's a real problem for those people, and it's a pity because it would be so easy to solve. And I think the way to solve it would be two ways. There should be some government subsidies. I do believe in government, and it should subsidize certain things. And on the other hand, we as consumers, a friend of mine pointed this out to me a long time ago, and I hated it, but it's true. We have to be willing to pay for what we want. We have to pay the whole value. There is a dairy farm down the road a piece from us, Strauss Dairy. It was started by Holocaust survivors in West Marin, and it's the first organic dairy, at least west of the Mississippi. There's a lot of turf west of the Mississippi. And what that means is that if a cow gets sick, they have to get rid of that cow because they can't put in antibiotics. They have to be very careful about feed. They all have electric vehicles, so they can't go more than 60 miles at one shot. But the fact is they're doing fine. We have a very fine French bakery in our little town, and so naturally, because of my Swadeshi, I have to go there to have almond croissants every Saturday and hang out with the local farmers. And there's Albert and his wife every weekend, and they're doing well. They have to branch out into doing organic ice cream and things like that. It's very good, Strauss ice cream. But it is possible to do, and it would not be difficult with just a little bit of sacrifice on our part and a little bit of effort and intelligence. Maybe that's the missing piece here. A little bit of intelligence on the part of the government. We would be able to convert to, what are we going to say, regenerative, closer to reality farming. Yeah, John? Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Okay, you're making an excellent point. John's making an excellent point here that was actually Gandhi's way into all of this, because I wanted to say a long time ago, so let me say it now. Gandhi did not straight out say a whole much about the environment or farming, and one of the reasons was it was second nature for him. For example, when my teacher, Sri Ishwaran, when he first heard of organic food, he said, organic food? What is that? Are people supposed to eat plastic? All food is organic. He didn't realize what we were talking about was highly processed versus not so highly processed. But in his farm in Kerala, South India, where Zoe might be going on spring break, they didn't even use fertilizer from cows on somebody else's field. It was so Swadeshi, so self-sufficient, so self-contained and regenerative. So the point that John is making is that this is going to be closely connected with kind treatment of animals, non-exploitive economic systems, localism. All of this is going to, if you get hold of one really basic thing and cling to it, you do satyagraha with it, the law of progression, you'll see it's spilling out into all other dimensions of regeneration that we need to talk about. Okay, good. So what I'd like to do, always ready to be trumped by your questions, but left to my own devices, what I would do in the next 15 minutes, I want to say just a little bit about the animal rights movement and then talk about major environmental struggles in India and at least tell you the name of the movement that I was going to talk about at some length, which is the Chipko movement. I guess we've said a number of things about the animal advocacy movement, which I think were very well said. I have to say that for some funny reason, it's an interesting reason, we should talk about it. For some reason, the animal rights, whatever you want to call it, movement has been the least nonviolent in terms of approach. And I'm sure you've all noticed this. And this manifests itself in a variety of ways. One is when these organizations come to do an exhibit on campus, it's going to be like Potrero. It's going to be like Abu Ghraib. Here's this horrible panoply of animals being tortured and you're guilty and so forth. The level of anger in this movement, of course I'm generalizing, there are exceptions, but the level of anger has been appalling. Now I happen to be a person for whom some of my best friends are animals. In a sense, all of my friends are animals, but I feel very deeply, relatively speaking, with the suffering of animals. I just have been trained that way, and I have often wanted to cooperate with groups that advocate this, and I have rarely, if ever, been able to, because they come on like gangbusters, like, let's trash the lab, let's do this, that, and the other thing. And I was in a project once, in fact, I started a project at Berkeley here on campus to save a colony of monkeys who had been the subjects of studies by the anthropology department. I mean, thank God for thank Hanuman that they were anthropology monkeys and not physiology monkeys, because that's a little bit rougher. But the anthropologists were just observing them, and then it's okay. It was a violation of their privacy, but it wasn't much more serious. And then they ran out of grant money. They couldn't keep the animals anymore, so their first thought is, well, we will have to destroy them. But they didn't act on it right away, so it leaked out. And again, Ishwaran got hold of this. He said, Michael, you have to fix this. And yes, sir. Went down to campus, got together with a bunch of friends, had a very good campaign going. And there was one person who almost torpedoed the campaign. He said, we really want to shaft the university on this one. And he's going to have these hate letters all ready to go. And now we're going to get him. And I said, look, I have my problems with this university. Don't get me wrong. You know, like any red-blooded American, I don't like bureaucracies any more than you do. But I'll tell you what, I said, why don't we save the monkeys this time and get the university on the next one? But he wouldn't go along with it. We have to get the university right now. And eventually we had to write a letter to the chancellor saying, hey, don't confuse us with him. And he was the main animal advocate in the East Bay. He was the head of one of the main animal advocacy groups. And so I'm asking myself, why, here's this project, this value, which is inherently so nonviolent, why is this, of all the sectors in the whole nonviolent movement, as far as I am aware, why is it the least nonviolent in attitude? And the only thing I could come up with, and tell me if you think this makes sense to you, if there might be some other reason. The only thing I can come up with is that somehow, when the creature being hurt is helpless, it triggers something in us which is deeper, even than it is, say, in the case of another human group. I mean, it's like children and animals being hurt, it infuriates us more than when it's human against human. Even though there are, you know, heavily armed humans against not so heavily armed humans. That's the only reason I can think of why this movement in particular has been so hampered by that kind of anger and ad hominem, recriminatory, vengeful approach. I went to a meeting in North Carolina one time. It was about animal rights, and I told them what I just told you, as well as some other things that were less offensive. And I think it went over pretty well. I think the only group that was really, really angry at me was the Italians. I don't know why, but they just, I don't know, maybe somehow that's how they approach things anyway. They're really not that angry when you just stop to talk to them. Okay, so in the interest of time, did you have a question, Ashley? Yeah.
If you don't have time.
There's always time for questions.
It was just that it doesn't seem consistent when you look at, you know, like the hopelessness of humans when compared to animals. It doesn't enrage like the kind of violence that attacks people against, like, for instance, the genocides or when refugees are being murdered and children likewise.
Yeah.
It's not that it's evoking this mobilization of people wanting to attack violently
Mhm.
as necessary. They sympathize.
Yeah. That's right. Even this question of child soldiers, which I think is probably the most painful blot against humanity that's happened, somehow it doesn't provoke that utter negative, counter-effective hatred the way it does in animal world. It's a funny thing. Arby?
It just kind of seems to me like when it comes to violence against like other humans,
Uh-huh.
people in general are against violence. Like people don't want genocide to continue. But it's I think the idea of like because when it comes to animal rights, you have to change a lot of things in culture. And I think there's a big stigma around it.
Mhm.
Like,
I think there is a stigma attached to it, and I think, you know, that's an interesting point. After all is said and done, if you didn't kill animals, you would not be able to eat them, right? You could run around, you know, despite that song, Oleana, Oleana, you could run around eating little roasted piggies. You have to kill them first. So if you're against killing, you're going to have to change your food habits. And there's a funny thing about food habits, they're a code. It's very, very deep. When classical scholars, for example, have studied food codes in the ancient Greek world, and they've shown that there are 4 basic schools of philosophy in the Hellenistic period in Athens, and each one was connected with a certain dietary pattern. So I think that's also a very good point. If people immediately feel threatened, okay, they could give up their fur coats, though I don't think that PETA goes about doing this very well. You know, they have a slogan, I'd rather go naked than wear furs. That, to me, that's a little bit confusing. But okay, people could give that up, and now we've got rayon, we don't need animal furs anymore. But somehow the food habit, you have to let people grow into this. And I'm thinking of now an episode when Gandhi went to Bihar, so we're talking 1917. A lot of volunteers collected, you know, thousands, we want to work with you. And whenever this happens in India, when we get thousands of people who pull together, not because they're members of a community, but because they're interested in an issue, you'll have a thing. Some of us are vegetarians, some of us not. What are we going to do? So the vegetarians are saying, hey, no non-vegetarian food here. So clean movement, they're going to have to eat zucchini. But it was Gandhi who said, let them have their kitchen and we'll have ours. And guess what? Within 1 week, the non-vegetarians had closed down their kitchen and come over and said, can we eat with you guys? Because A, vegetarian food's a lot better. If you don't believe me, just order a vegetarian meal next time you're on United Airlines. All your fellow passengers will say, hey, what's that? But B, I think it's because that's the only way it can go. You know, you can't ask vegetarians not to be vegetarians, but you can ask non-vegetarians to temporarily eat vegetarian. That way you get the community back together. Well, once again, I feel very good about what we have said. I feel a slight pang of regret about what we have not said. Let me just give a piece of it, and that is to say that in India today, there are major struggles going on, and they are tending to not be in the area of militarism, but they are tending to be in the area of environmental protection. And they tend to be directed at the federal government, you know, the GOI, Government of India, but with full awareness that the government of India, in this respect, is really not a government of India anymore. It's a government of multinational corporations being used by them. And I think you could kind of make a list of 4 or 5 really basic environmental areas where these struggles are going on at a really acute level with some significant successes. One, the first, historically speaking, was against clear cutting, logging, and that's where our Chipko movement would have come in if I had gotten to it. I'll figure out a way of making us more familiar with it. The second is against dams. So to go by organization, this group here is the Chipko Andolan. Andolan means movement. And Chipko means hugging, so this is a hugging movement. Now, it's not what you're thinking. This is not like a flower child hugging movement taking place in Golden Gate Park. This is women hugging trees to prevent them from being felled by axe-wielding corporate operatives. Another organization is the Narmada Bachao Andolan, which means saved the Narmada movement. The Narmada is an extensive river system that starts in sort of central Gangetic Plain and flows west to enter the sea near Gandhi's hometown of Porbandar. So it flows mostly through, starts in Madhya Pradesh, I think, and some of the tributaries, and ends up in Gujarat. The government of India, as part of its modernization program, I just have to back up here one slight little step. There is an excellent documentary made by the BBC, interestingly enough, called Gandhi's India, and it talks about the fact that Gandhi's economic ideas were completely reversed by the independent governments of India, the Nehru government. They said, this absolutely will not work. We cannot have village uplift, decentralization, Swadeshi, none of that. We need industrialization, and we need it fast. And, it would be hard to argue with that. You had millions of people starving. You can't wait for those 2 years that you were talking about, actually, for the system to rebound. But anyway, they went too far, way too far, completely rejected everything that Gandhi had stood for, and by the late 50s, Indians were beginning to realize that this is not working for our country, and they're trying to rediscover simple economics, natural economics. And by this time, the government had put in probably the most ambitious dam building project in the world, maybe second to the Three Gorges project in China, but after those two, probably the biggest in the world. And what happens when you build these dams? Well, you know really well what happens if you have huge lakes where you used to have forests. You have drastic shifts in water availability. And the government was claiming that whenever villagers would be driven out of their land, they would be resettled, and they had a very ambitious resettlement project for them, and it was very intelligent. And the electrical power and water would be made available to farmers. Well, people like Arundhati Roy and others used their intellectual prowess to show that you still had people living in refugee camps in utter squalor after 10 years, and somehow all the money that was designated to put them into nice little model villages, even if that were an acceptable solution, which it is not. You wrench people out of their village where their families have been living for 1,000 years and say, now we'll give you a nice concrete Quonset hut to live in. I'm afraid not. So even at best, it wouldn't have been very good, but it was not at best by any means. They were just living like refugees. And secondly, guess what? All that water and all that electrical power was going to the coal companies and the big power firms downstream from these villages. So there's been a big resistance movement to the dams, and parts of this movement have been third stage satyagraha, meaning people, villagers, sometimes individuals, you only need one really to make this work, but sometimes in large numbers, have said, I refuse to leave my village. If you flood it, I will drown. And they have actually stopped the government from doing that. And I have a friend who, when the American River was going to be dammed somewhere north of Sacramento, at Auburn? Right, that's right, you remember that. He, my friend, went up there and chained himself to a rock up his chest in the water and sent a telegram to the authorities in Sacramento saying, I am chained to this river in an undisclosed location, and if you build that dam, I will drown. And in those days, they didn't have the kind of super spy equipment that they have today. They couldn't find him, and they had to postpone it. Did the Auburn Dam have an engine? Okay. Yes, evil exists as long as you support it. If you keep re-electing it, you're going to have to keep fighting it. Okay, let me quickly mention that there are a couple of other areas, three in particular. Genetic seed modification, which has been horrendous. Changing people's economies into commercially exportable, particularly shrimp fisheries, for example. And thirdly and finally, Coca-Cola, which has been one of the most conspicuous successes. They bring in a Coca-Cola plant. Notice the word plant, ha ha ha. People have been drinking coconut water for 10,000, 20,000 years in this village. It goes, fine, thank you, we replant the coconut trees, no problem. And suddenly they come in and say, no, you don't want to drink water or coconut milk, you want Coke, don't you? We have a big billboard, the entrance to your village that's telling you this. And it turns out that in order to manufacture Coca-Cola, among other deficits, you have to extract unthinkable vast quantities of groundwater to do it. And a group called the Sarvodaya Mandal, which means, Sarvodaya means the uplift of all, Sarvodaya, and Mandal means circle, in the sense of network, organization, which is a direct, as I would say, here and here, you have direct descendants of Gandhi. I'll forget in a little time, I'll talk about that in greater detail. Sarvodaya was a Gandhian concept, it's a Gandhi-inspired organization, and I have an interview with one of the heads of this on videotape that I'll try and use for you. But they have, using purely nonviolent methods, they have stopped Coca-Cola from expanding or continuing to function in a number of locations. Thank you for listening to the Express Train here today, and